My name is Lisa Kaplowitz. I am the co-founder and executive director of the Rutgers Center for Women in Business, where we are trying to change the face and future of leadership. We are doing that by removing barriers, building community, and empowering women with confidence and skills. While we know that it doesn't matter how confident and skilled she is, there are still structural and institutional barriers that hold her back. Today, we are going to be talking about empowering and the power of saying no. I am so excited to be joined here today with Dr. Vanessa Patrick. Thanks for being with us, Vanessa.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa.
I'm going to brag about her for a second. She is the executive director of doctoral programs, a Bauer professor of marketing, and lead faculty of the Executive Women in Leadership program at the Bauer School of Business at University of Houston. She has won so many teaching and research awards, and she actually was, she was appointed as a Fulbright specialist for 5 years, which is amazing and such an incredible honor and accomplishment. She is a regular speaker at both academic and industry conferences. She's a prominent scholar. She serves on the editorial and policy boards of leading academic journals. I could go on, but I'm just really excited that you're here with us, Vanessa. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
So we are going to talk about her book, The Power of Saying No. It has been awarded the Next Big Idea Book Award. It's been awarded other awards from Inc. magazine and others. So before we get started and we bias you in any way, we want to ask you a couple questions. When do you have trouble saying no? Is it in your personal life? Is it in your professional life? Is it both? Professionally, personally, by the way, I said to Vanessa ahead of time as we were back in the virtual green room, this is going to be a personal self-help session for me, because this is a challenge I know I have both in all aspects of my life. So I read the book, which was incredible, and she's going to give us some tips and tricks to really help us out as well. So it looks like most people are having trouble in both realms of their life.
This is not surprising, Lisa. This is what the no is a tough thing to deal with in both professional and personal lives, and we are seeing that here.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So now we want to know how you feel. Okay. So how do you feel when you say yes, but really want to say no? So type in one word, because these word clouds work best when we're only typing one word. Ooh, I love this. I mean, I don't love how you're actually feeling, but I think it's really insightful. Resentful, extended, conflicted, angry, pressured. Look at how big pressured is. I mean, I think all of these emotions and sentiments, resentful, I was going to say a lot of resent, anxious, pressured. Look at how pressured we are to say yes, Vanessa, when we really want to say no. You're going to help us with this, right?
I'm going to try for sure. And this is the kind of stuff that comes out in the data as well. No is a tough word. And these feelings are real and legitimate.
Yeah, this is really interesting. So I'm going to stop sharing, but I appreciate all of you sharing how you're feeling and how it makes you feel when you say yes, but you really just want to say no. Vanessa, tell us, why do we do it? Why do we say yes when we really want to say no? Why is it so hard for us? Why is it so hard for me?
It is a function of being a human being. All human beings are born to be social creatures. And to be social, we need to kind of collaborate and cooperate with other people. And so we are socialized to always try and give our best to others. And very often saying no, it goes against that social expectation. So, in the literature, we call it a social norm violation, which essentially means that, there are norms. The norm is you have to say yes to anybody who asks you. And saying no is a violation of that norm. And so in my book, I call saying no a harmony buster, because a lot of people, all of the word cloud words are really the opposite of feeling harmonious and calm and happy, right? All of them, it's about anxiety, frustration, guilt, resentment, pressure. And these are real, and they come across every single time that we need to say no to something.
And do women end up saying yes when they want to say no more often? Is it harder for women to say no?
So the research shows that women definitely have a harder time saying no. It is definitely a gendered issue. We are more likely to say yes to workplace requests. We are more likely to say yes even if we want to say no. So I've got data in a survey that I conducted with more than 2,000 people, and I reported that in the book. And you see a clear gender difference. It's not that men don't have trouble with saying no. A lot of men do, but it is because women are socialized to be the nurturer, the giver, the good person, the communal, the person who's communally oriented. And these are all the reasons why we struggle with saying no, and often say yes when we want to say no.
Right. I think, when we wrote about this as well, about women think that we need to sacrifice in order to be successful, and we want people to like us. And again, it's all of that conditioning. You talk about a couple different activities. You talk about good for me versus not good for me.
Yeah.
How do you decide what to say yes to and when to say no? Can you talk about like some frameworks?
Yeah, absolutely. So a key takeaway from the book is that it's not about just saying no. It's about saying yes to the right things and saying no to the things that are not good for you. So being able to discern and sift between what are good for me activities, the ones that I should say yes to, and decide what I should say no to is the first step before you can begin to say no. It's funny, Lisa, many people think that I'm the queen of no, and I just go around saying no a lot. That's not true. I do a lot, but it's aligned with who I am and how I want to show up in the world. So you have to say no to the things that don't matter so that you can say yes to the things that do. And I think that that's the key trade-off that we have to negotiate every time an ask comes our way. So coming back to your question about a framework, it's a simple 2x2. On one hand, we have to evaluate what is the cost of saying yes to us. And the cost can be in terms of energy, time. It can even be costly because you just don't like to do it, right? So that's cost on one axis. And on the other axis, the benefit that you bring to the world if you do say yes. So the benefit to others. So it's about weighing the costs with the benefits. And once we actually think about weighing the cost with the benefits, it turns out that, we are definitely not going to be saying no to everybody, but instead saying yes when we can make a positive difference with what we take on. Yes, when it showcases our unique talent. Yes, when we can do good to the world and no to everything else. So there are some things, for example, that are simple for us to do, but are hugely important for others. I call these the pass the salt asks, where the cost to us is relatively low because it's easy, it's quick, or we have really mastered those tasks. And the benefit that we can confer on others by saying yes to these tasks is immense. So I call them pass the salt tasks because you can imagine yourself sitting at a dining table and someone saying, "Hey, Lisa, can you pass the salt?" And you just lift up the salt shaker and pass it along. It's not a big deal for you, but presumably you're making a big difference to the other person's meal. Now, these pass the salt asks are things that come naturally to us that we're good at. So when someone asks us something like, for example, as a professor, someone asked me to write a recommendation letter. For me, a recommendation letter request is a pass the salt ask to which I most often say yes. And the reason I say yes is because I have a system down about how I write recommendation letters. It's relatively easy for me. But I also know that it makes a huge difference to my students. They get into the job that they want, the college that they want. And so this is my way of doing good in the world, right? Helping someone out, and something that I can uniquely do in my position, right? So we need to say yes to pass the salt asks. The worst kind of asks are what I call bake your famous lasagna asks. These are what I call careless asks. These are someone just throwing an ask out there without really considering the effort and time that you would probably have to invest in order to do those things. So, for example, a bake your famous lasagna ask is something that you would take on even though you didn't want to. And it made no positive difference. So the story I tell in the book is, let's imagine you have a friend who is throwing a party and says, hey, why everyone bring something, and then looks at you and says, you have a signature lasagna dish that you make. Why don't you bring that? And of course, the idea of you spending, perhaps a day making your signature dish, which is then going to be on a table with everybody else's store-bought cookies and party trays, doesn't make sense. And so I would say no to the bake your famous lasagnas because it doesn't create unique value. And the reason we have to say no to bake your famous lasagnas is because we really have to reserve our energy, our time, our motivation to what I call hero's journey asks. So hero's journey asks are those asks that are maybe difficult to do for you, but they create a positive difference in the world. And so learning, and this is a hugely important skill that I talk about in the book, which is learning how to decipher the ask, learning how to spot an ask and categorize it. Is it a bake your famous lasagna ask? Is it a hero's journey ask? Is it a pass the salt ask? These asks, deciding to spot the ask kind of helps inform whether you say yes or no.
No, I think that's really helpful. And as a finance professor and an economics major, I love how you framed that into marginal cost and marginal benefit of the actual ask as well. I think that's fabulous. I think I just had a pass the salt ask come to me with my child who needs a photo ID and said, when you're done with this webinar, can you please send me a copy of my passport? So yes, that's more of a pass the salt. But I actually recently had one that the person probably would have categorized it as a hero's journey, or as a bake the lasagna one, or maybe a pass the salt. But to me, it would have been almost debilitating and really trying. And yep, I could do it, but I don't know that I want to do it. And I don't know that I want to use my time to do it. And then those are those asks, and I'm sure we've all had them, that keep us up at night. We're stewing through it. Then we're upset with the person. And then we're like, should we do it? Should we not do it? I could do it. I don't know if I want to do it. It's going to take a whole bunch of time. How are we supposed to handle that?
So I actually found this visual, which I might kind of cement this for our listeners.
Yeah.
So these are this is the way to think about them, right? So you've got these pass the salt asks, and if you say yes to the things you should never say yes to, because they're not worth doing, because they don't benefit anybody. But what's really important, and what you pointed out in that last comment that you made, Lisa, is that this is a very unique framework. What's easy for me to do may not be easy for somebody else, and vice versa. And so the lens that we take, someone can't tell you, hey, this is a pass the salt ask. It has to feel like a pass the salt ask for you. It is easy for you. You have to feel that way. And the best way to kind of figure this out is a combination of self-reflection and self-awareness, where you know what energizes you, what gives you joy, versus the things that really, take away from what you're excited about, and also asking questions. So when someone asks you, to figure out that it is in fact a hero's journey asks, you have to really discern the benefit. You have to ask the necessary questions to identify, is this actually a hero's journey as? Because otherwise it may not make sense. So having a dialogue, and one of the things I talk about in the book is to say yes in the moment, because in the heat of the moment we are more likely to say yes to bake your famous lasagna asks, because we haven't had the time to think about them.
So that's the whole concept of timeshare sales, by the way.
Yes, exactly. So you kind of jump into it because it's so we call it, in psychology, we call it making a decision in a hot state, where it's excitement and high arousal, versus making a decision in a cold state. We are much more likely to say yes to things we should do when we are in that hot state. So one of the things I always advise is, hey, always buy time. Have handy statements at the tip of your tongue which says, you know what, that sounds really interesting, let me get back to you with my availability, or let me email you after I've had the time to look at my calendar, or something that says, I need the time to determine that this is worth saying yes to. Until we become really practiced at it, we need to buy ourselves that time.
Right, I love that. Let me think about it. Let me look at my calendar. Let me see what else I have going on. Really good.
Number one rule, absolutely.
I love it. So this one in particular, which is going to dovetail right into the next thing I want to ask you, wasn't really an ask. It was more like you should be doing this and you need to be doing this. And why aren't you doing this? Not like, hey, can you do this for me? And so talk to us, because a lot of your book, the research that you've done, that you've included in the book, is on empowered refusal. So can you tell us a little bit more about what that is?
Yes. So the core of the book, the core nugget of the book, is my research on empowered refusal, which I love and I'm really excited about. So empowered refusal is a way of saying no. And it's a kind of a different way of saying no than we are used to, because it's a way of saying no that grounds our refusal in our identity. It grounds the refusal in who we are. When we say no based on who we are, our identity, what we believe in, our values, our priorities, our preferences, and our beliefs, we are more likely to get compliance from others. If you think about it, most of us, natural default is to reach out to the nearest excuse that we can find. So most often when someone asks us to do something, we lean on an excuse. And what my research says is an excuse is an external factor. That external factor is transient. It comes and goes. You come across as much more empowered when you say no based on the stable factor, which is your identity. This is who I am. I'm saying no because it is not the right thing for me as a person. And that is much more persuasive. And along with that grounding your refusal in the identity comes the language that accompanies and implicates that identity. So instead of saying, I can't because of some external excuse, you say, I don't because this is who I am. And so in my research, I've found that when you reframe your refusal from saying, I can't to I don't, you come across as much more empowered, much more determined, and in the driver's seat of your own life, which basically does not invite pushback from others. People are less likely to push back on someone and kind of convince you or argue back. Because one of the things you see, if I say, I can't do this, your first question is, why not? Right? Whereas when you say, I don't do this, nobody pushes back because this is who you are. And so it's that simple switch in language that can have a powerful impact on how effective our refusal is.
No, I think that's really important. And you call these words, I think you call them stand-up words.
Yes, I call them standing up words because it's very hard to say I don't without kind of standing up tall and taking ownership of your refusal. When you say I can't, it's almost like one of those shrinking words. It causes you to, your whole body to kind of withdraw and shrink, whereas standing upward is a much more empowered word.
No, I love that. And we talked about this beforehand as well, that and you know, I think it's harder sometimes to say I don't or I won't, or it's all in the tone. So as you said, a pass yourself for you is writing recommendations. So first of all, we need to have a sidebar after this of why it's so efficient for you. I actually have a policy that I tell my students, I only write recommendations if you earned an A in my class and I've actually met you outside of class once, because otherwise I'd be writing 50 recommendations. And I tell them the reason is you only want a recommendation where I'm going to say you're wonderful and fabulous in the top of the class. Yeah. And if I'm not going to write you that recommendation, it's not going to help you. It's actually going to hurt you. So go find another professor that could do that. That I'm comfortable with. But when I hear I don't, or I won't do that, a lot of times when I hear it, it's hard for me to embrace that from the other side. And I'm wondering if that has something to do with how it's delivered. And so I'm uncomfortable saying that stuff a lot.
So I think you raise a very good point, which is one of the competencies that I talk about. So I talk about 3 competencies in the book, which is the art of empowered refusal and how we get better at saying no to the things that are not important to us. And I think you tapped into the fact that how you say no is really important. First of all, it needs to be based on who you are. And to identify who you are, you need to invest in the first competency, which is A, for self-awareness. So the art stands for awareness, rules, not decisions, and then totality of self. So awareness is the fundamental thing, looking inwards for why you want to say no to this particular thing and having that deep awareness. With that deep in self-awareness, it's really useful to develop policies about how you are going to respond to things. These policies can be at a category level. So these are the kind of things that I generally say yes to. These are the kind of things I generally say no to. Or they could be very specific. I say no to this, or I say yes to this. And so it can be at a different level. But just having broad guidelines of the kinds of things that you want to engage in, how you want to show up in the world, what you want the world to see about you is really important. Other thing, which is the third competency, that is the totality of self. And this is where the how of communication is. Simply saying I don't without doing it with compassion and conviction does not work as effectively. So I implicate the idea of that saying no should be a full body experience. In the sense, we can use the tone of voice, the way we lean in, the way we smile. These are the ways in which we can kind of buffer any negativity when you're using empowered language. So I talk about 2 key ways in which we can buffer the harshness of a refusal. And one is by using body language to secure that relationship. So you can lean in, you can smile, you can tap someone on the shoulder. But you also have to know that even though you're doing that thing, you're not wavering from your stance. And so that takes practice. So on one hand, you want to use body language that doesn't allow you to leak power. Because the worst thing is saying no, but your whole body saying, I can be convinced otherwise.
Right.
And sometimes you see the body language coming in the way of you communicating. So the idea is to be able to use your body
and
language.
By the way, I want to be crystal clear. We're talking about like asks, not like sexual assault and harassment.
Yes. We're talking about everyday asks that people would ask you in the course of a normal day.
Right.
So your body language needs to be in concert with your.
Right. So Vanessa, a couple questions that I'm seeing in the chat. Robin wants to know, what if it's really important to the other person, but it's kind of a lasagna for you? And then you end up doing regardless of how painful. Can our personal policies help us
Absolutely.
that?
So, all of us are going to sometimes do the things that we don't want to do. I think all of us will go through that. It's never going to be a situation where you're never going to do anything that you never want to do. So I think that accepting that, but if you see that there's a pattern of behavior, you realize that you keep falling into the same pattern of behavior. So for example, something simple like, it's nice to drop people to the airport, for example. But in Houston, when you're driving, you probably spend 3 hours getting to the airport and back. Now, I do not like dropping people to the airport at all, because it's a huge waste of time, and I am not a fan of driving. And so, so if you think about it, it might be super important, and I might do it for my mom or my dad or my sisters, but I'm not going to be like the person who drops people to airports, because that's just not something I enjoy. So once in a while, if you choose to do it, you should do it, and do it without the resentment. But if you find yourself falling in the same trap again and again, that is when you need to develop a personal policy. So very often personal policies stem from a pain point. So if you identify a pain point and say, this is something that bugs me, this is something I really want to stop, how can I develop a policy that allows me to communicate that policy from my identity? So, I don't drop people to airports. That's it.
You're a much
I just
nicer
don't do it.
family member than I am, because we have a similar situation with the distance, and I say I will pay for your Uber.
Yes.
But
me
because
too.
that's a pass the salt for me.
Yes.
Right. But going to the airport is like much more than a lasagna.
Yeah. And by the same token, I don't ask anyone to take me to the airport. I'll hop into an Uber, because I really, really don't want to put other people through the thing that I hate to do. So the idea is to figure out, how do you set up a personal policy to avoid the things that you don't want to do, and then communicate. When you say, I have a policy about something. And so in my research, I've come up with many people have talked about things that how they want to operate in the world, and then things just happen in organizations that one of the examples that comes to mind is a leader who worked at a bank, and she had a kind of a senior position, and for her, she felt that having a good sense of where they stood financially every day, first thing, was really important for her to function well for the rest of the day. And she found she was being drawn into 8 a.m. meetings. So she essentially set a policy saying, I'm not available between 8 and 9 for meetings. And just by simply communicating the policy, people stopped asking her for 8 o'clock meetings, because she used her 8 to 9 time to do what she needed to do to perform well. If you don't have a policy in place and you don't communicate that policy, people are going to assume that you're available, and they're going to ask you.
Yep.
And so it's really up to us to identify, what are some of the bounds? What are some of the things that I would like to happen? And then put policies around that.
No, I think that's good. And also offering up alternatives, I think is really helpful, because that's part of that tone of, nope, I don't do it from 8 to 9, and I don't do it from 5 to 6. And if somebody just said, and I'm totally available from 9 to 5, or okay, great. Okay, fine to know.
Absolutely.
There are a couple more questions that I think are really great. What if you say, I don't, my personal policy is I don't do this, I won't do this. And then your boss is like, you know what? You really should be doing this. Like, you're making a huge mistake. How can we respond to that, in addition to doing more diligence to see if your boss is really just making stuff up?
Right. So the question about how do you say no to your boss comes up all the time. And I think the first thing that you need to assess is whether the ask, or if the boss is asking you something, this is something that is part of your job. Because very often in organizations, there are activities that we call non-promotable work. Non-promotable work is stuff that no one gets paid to do.
It usually falls to the woman.
Yes. And so it's the office housework, and it never gets discussed in any annual performance review. And women are disproportionately more likely to be asked to do non-promotable work and to say yes to that non-promotable work. And so non-promotable work are things like organizing the retirement party, bringing coffee and donuts to meetings, the nice things. But you don't get promoted. You never discuss it in your annual performance review. You're not going to get promoted. And I think that that's where women especially need to recognize that there's a trade-off. Because when you do non-promotable work, then you're not doing promotable work. And because the time is finite, and so if you're spending your time doing this, you're not doing that, and kind of recognizing that. The only exception to doing non-promotable work is if it's your turn. So one of the things that many organizations do is basically do like a round robin. This year, I am looking after the interns or the internship program. And next year, someone else will. And the next year, someone else will. And so if you're taking turns to do non-promotable work, that's a fair way to handle it. Now, we talk about non-promotable work. If your boss comes to you asking you to do things that are actually within the scope of your work, but you really have a full plate, step number one is always to take the time to think about how you're going to say yes or no and whether you should say yes or no. So never say yes or no in the moment. Always be thinking about, is this a good thing or a bad thing for me to say yes to? So buy some time and then make a case either ways. Very often, and I call this, I do this exercise in the book and in my classes, where essentially very often people are just looking for the first person to take stuff off their responsibility. They're looking to transfer responsibility to somebody else. And what I argue in the book is that if you say yes, now it is your responsibility. But if you say no, that person most likely is simply just going to go and ask somebody else. Right? And so you have to look at whether the thing that you're being asked for showcases your unique talent, is aligned with who you want to be in the organization, the things you want to be known for, your personal brand, if you will. And quite importantly, that what are the things that you will not be able to do because you are taking this on? And being able to communicate that to the boss.
Yeah. There are a couple other really good questions. And I think so that actually answered Katie's question, I think there. But, you have a couple of these self-tests in the book, right?
Mm-hmm.
I took them all. I basically suffer from all the traps. But can you talk about them, the traps that we fall into? Specifically, I think the acquaintance trap and the house of cards trap are two of the ones that I think a lot of people probably.
So when you think about why people struggle with saying no, there are three main reasons. One is your concern for your relationship with other people. So we talked about being social creatures. And so very often we say yes, because we value the relationship with the other person. We are concerned that, that saying no will damage that relationship. But, all relationships are not equal. There are some relationships that are stronger than others. So, for example, what I show and argue in the book is that it's pretty easy or easier to say no to people very close to you with whom you have a secure relationship. You're not worried about offending them, that the relationship tie will break. So people who live in your house, maybe your kids, these are people with whom you have a strong and secure relationship. And there are other people on the other end of the spectrum who are people who are complete strangers. You're never going to see them again. Someone you might meet at the grocery store, at the post office. If they ask you something, you could say no, and it's not a big deal because you're never going to see them again, most likely. It's the whole bunch of people that are in the middle, the people with whom you have good but not great relationships, with whom you have tenuous ties. Those ties could be broken. This is the category I call acquaintances. And very often, the acquaintance trap is the saying yes to those people because we are afraid of the relationship being destroyed. And so learning to manage that acquaintance trap and recognizing, this is an acquaintance and I value this relationship. And so this is why I'm falling into this trap. And then figuring out how do I use empowered refusal to say no to that neighbor or to that, old friend from high school.
No, I think that's great. We have a couple other questions. Gina had asked, what if my heart's saying yes, but I know I just don't have time to do it? So, I think we all get a lot of these, and we really want to do it. And we think they're past the salt, but when you have a whole bunch of salt, it turns into an oversalted lasagna.
Yes, and I call that the many mickles make a muckle trap, right?
Yeah.
In the book, where you land up spending a lot of time doing that. I completely hear. I think it was Jenna who talked about how you manage saying no when your heart is saying yes.
Yes.
This is real. I mean, these are real feelings, and sometimes you have to make some hard choices. We have to recognize the trade-off. When we say yes to one thing, we are saying no to something else. So I very often do a calendar exercise where I look at my calendar and think about, where am I going to fit this in? And one of the things that requires a reframe. So for instance, we are all capable people who can do a lot of things, but they often come at a cost. So very often, and this stems from research, when you're thinking about a tough thing, you can ask yourself, can I do this? And yes, you can do it. It might mean that you'll get less sleep, have to come in early or stay late, go out of your way and put yourself through a lot of pain. You can do it. The question is not whether you can do it, but whether you should do it. So very often, just switching the question from can I do it? Because most capable people can do a lot of things. And switching it to should I do it? When you ask yourself, should I do it? Then you're putting yourself through a much more critical analysis of whether this is a good use of your time, whether this is something good for you. A lot of the heart saying yes goes away when you think, should I do this? Is this a good way to spend my time? When you ask yourself, can I do it? Then the heart says, yes, you can. And yes, you must. But when you say, should I do it? You take a much more critical view, and then you are more likely to say no.
Right. I think that's really important. And I think even something I know I've done that's worked really well is, and I'm sure you get this too, tons of requests from students, from people that aren't even your students, from former students wanting career advice and help and whatnot. And so what I've decided to do is I have office hours, and I have office hours every week, and they sign up by appointment, and I don't care who uses those office hours. And then if they're not my current students right before an exam, I say, don't book it during that time. But my heart wants to help all of these students. And so I've just carved out time, and I know, okay, this time, but I'm not going to do it outside of that time because I got to do all these other things.
And so like those are personal policies and budgets you can put in place, right? Like, okay, my quota is I'm going to write 3 recommendation letters a semester, let's say, or 3 recommendation letters a month. Whatever it is, your quota is where you can start. And then once you've fulfilled your quota, it's easier to say no to the things that you don't want to do.
Right. So two more. One, Katie and Erica. So you're the go-to person, and everybody dumps it on you because they know you'll get it done and you're really good at it. How do you change those people's minds and in a way that you still has your personal policies, but how can you say no to those people when everyone's so used to you saying yes, yes, yes?
Yes, this is definitely, if you've already got a reputation, that reputation is going to take some time and some work to develop. But you can always do that by saying things like, I've been reflecting on this, and this is no longer something that I am excited about. And so I'm not going to be taking that on anymore. So really about who you are and where you really are, where you are at. But, I also have to say that's, I am in Marshall Goldsmith's 100 Coaches group. and Marshall is like the number one top executive coach in the world. And I learn a lot from Marshall, and he says that sometimes if you're in an environment and you have a reputation that nobody wants, and you want to change that reputation, you need to change the environment. Yeah, sometimes you just, if this is not working for you and you've tried everything, and you just have to say, okay, this is not a good environment for me.
Right.
I can't do that unless I've actually communicated from a place of empowerment. I have changed my mind, and you are allowed to change your mind. I don't want to do this anymore. It's a powerful place to be if you know that.
Right. Right. And I guess the alternative is I need more compensation for what I'm doing. Sometimes, right? So there's another one, and this one's really interesting, and I think this happens to women a lot, is that somebody tells you, and the excuses come up. Like, we've been getting a lot of excuses of why I can't come to class lately. And I find that the female professors end up getting more of the excuses that people think we're going to be like, sure, no problem. And so Shay's saying, I have somebody coming to me, they say they don't have the capacity, but I really think that they do have the capacity, and they wouldn't pull this if somebody else were the manager. How do you deal with that?
So how do you deal with someone saying
no, but it could be the other way around for female managers, as their team says no. So when a man tells me no, right, I'm a female manager and it's fine, but the female manager doesn't. So I can read you verbatim what
I can read it.
Okay.
So basically someone's not taking your no serious.
Correct.
Right?
No, you're the manager.
And they're not taking your staff is not taking you saying no seriously, pushing back.
No, your staff is saying no to you.
Pushing back when you ask them to do
Pushing back
something.
when you don't think they're working at full capacity.
So I'm going to read it. I'm a manager, and there was a situation where I asked my staff to do something, and she says, I don't have capacity. I did not think that was true. So how should I respond when I believe that she needs to do it? So when someone says that they don't have capacity, conversation, right? So there are, if we think about kind of mental health and burnout in the workplace, these are real things that are happening. And so we do know that there is something there. And sometimes it requires the manager to have the conversation, to bring in the right people. If someone says, hey, I don't have capacity, I'm burnt out, then maybe there needs to be some sort of intervention where you bring in HR, where you bring in support person. But if this person is consistently saying, sorry, I cannot do this because I'm just tired or sleepy or whatever it is, and it's a chronic pattern of not taking on responsibility, then it's time to have a conversation about what the role and responsibility of that person is and how they need to show up. And if they don't show up, then maybe you need to replace that person. I mean, I'm not an expert at human resources, but to me, this seems like a logical thing, that if there's a job that needs to be done and it is that person's job, then they have to do the job. Yeah. That's a responsibility.
That makes sense. Another question, Gina, what are good strategies to get over the guilt factor when I could do something and it would be really nice to do it, similar to Robin's question, but I should not do it because I'm totally fried.
Yeah.
And I really don't have time to do it.
Yeah. So, I've actually studied guilt, and guilt arises from the belief that has been a transgression or that you have done something wrong. Just reframing that to yourself is so important. Looking after yourself, giving yourself the oxygen that you need so that you can help others later is so important. So if you're tired, maybe this is not a good time for you to take something on, and there's no need to feel guilty. You owe it to yourself to give yourself that time to recover. So reframing it as from being, it's a bad thing to say no. I think what I'm seeing from Gina is like, oh my God, I really don't like saying no because it sounds like a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to say no if it's not good for you. So I think it's kind of a mental reframe. As soon as you mentally reframe it, you feel less guilty, right? Because it's about, do you value yourself more than you value other people, or vice versa? If you value other people more than you're going to end up feeling guilty and burned out.
Which is, I think, a lot of women do. I fall into that trap as well. Speaking of traps, you also had talked about the house of cards trap.
Yes. And so this is similar to some of the things that we've talked about already, which is essentially the idea that, and such an important thing for professional women, we very often say yes when we want to say no because we worry about our reputation. We are worried that people will, think that we are either not capable or not competent, or that we are not very nice. And we want to be seen as both nice as well as competent, which is a hard act to pull off. You're both nice as well as really good at your job. And so that we are concerned about our reputation. But I always argue that taking on stuff that you do not have the capacity to do well is going to damage your reputation more in the long run than saying yes in the moment and dropping the ball. So if you cannot perform at the level of excellence that you hold yourself, you should say no to those tasks. And so that's the lens that I use. Can I do this at the level I believe it needs to be done? If I don't have the bandwidth, I don't have the time, I'm not going to do the work that I'm asked to do because I don't have the capacity to do it at the level at which it needs to be asked. Because reputation is so important to maintain.
Mm-hmm.
And so the house of cards trap is essentially, adding things into your calendar. And it's like this, adding cards to an increasingly fragile house of cards. The more you add, especially when you don't have the time to do that, those things, is going to result in the whole house falling down. And in the long run, damaging your reputation even more.
Totally. Before we close this out, because we're running out of time, I want to just put up, first of all, your kudos, your Inc. Non-Obvious Book Award.
Thank you.
But also the QR code to order the book. You can find out more about Vanessa on her website, vanessapatrick.net. You can connect with her on LinkedIn, Vanessa Patrick 23. And, before she gives us her closing thoughts, and Viviana, if you could put the book link in the chat again as well, that would be great. Have to thank our partners, Moody's, our title partner, and our others, because without their support, we really couldn't be delivering you all the content and knowledge and change that I know we all want to see. So with that, Vanessa, words of wisdom, any last thoughts that you want to leave us all with so we can be more empowered to say no?
Absolutely. So I believe that no is a super skill that we should all learn, because it is something that allows us to bring our best selves to the world. It also, I believe, has a spillover effect on other things. When we learn to say no more effectively, we become more confident. We are able to negotiate better, to advocate for ourselves and for others and for causes we care about. So when we start investing in this skill of saying no, we can see ourselves transforming to a better self in the future.
No, I think that's incredible. And I think you're the one who told me no is a full sentence.
Indeed, I did.
Yeah. So thank you, Vanessa. So grateful to have you here. I know I learned a lot. I hope other folks have some skills. We're approaching Thanksgiving. So that's personally a time where I know we get a lot of asks as we approach this holiday season. So take these skills, read the book, take these lessons and tips with you both personally and professionally. So thank you all very, very much. Have a wonderful holiday season.